These mountains have many names. They were known as the Foam Mountains to the Spanish, as the Crooked Top Mountain to the Pima, and they were known to the Apache as the Rocks Standing Up. It is said that all mountains are believed to be a kind of purgatory where all Apache souls must pass before or even after their deaths. Some would say that devils roam the hills, and mystical forces keep their secrets. All throughout the ages, all across the world, striking mountain ranges are often regarded as sacred places where the superstitious would rarely dare to tread. Yet in the southeastern end of the Valley of the Sun in the heart of Arizona, there lies a mountain range that by their very name attract the same. Our story begins geologically 18 to 20.5 million years ago during the Jurassic period. This was around the time when the relatively small volcanoes in southeastern Arizona began to grow and were eventually replaced by massive caldera-forming volcanic eruptions. The history of volcanism in Arizona is truly fascinating. From the original standing 16,000-foot San Francisco Peak that many know today as the Arizona Snow Bowl or Humphreys Peak in Flagstaff, to the Turkey Creek caldera, also known as the Chiricahua National Monument, Arizona is no stranger to massive complex volcanic systems and geological majesties, of which the Superstition Range is just one of many. Eventually, this caldera collapsed in on itself, and the softer layers of sediment have eroded over millions of years, now exposing the massive jutting and jumbled rock formations we see today as the Superstition Mountains. The rock is mostly made up of welded tuff, which is cemented ash, granite, basalt, and dacite. The superstitions have peaks and valleys that rapidly rise 3,000 feet above the valley floor, with some peaks rising as high as 5,000 feet. The Flatiron hiked via the Siphon Draw Trail is a massive, exposed, and eroding stone structure. Standing on top of it offers one of the most outstanding 360-degree views in the entire state of Arizona. But when did humans first set foot here? Now that we have drones, camelbacks, cell phones, the mountains are much less feared and far more frequently tread. However, even to this day, people still get lost, go missing, or willfully walk into the face of fable and story with such obsession that it consumes them. The Hohokam people were undoubtedly one of history's most interesting cultures. Comparable to the irrigation systems of Egypt and China, the Hohokam used the Salt River to create massive irrigation networks and left one of the largest impacts on the archaeological history of the region. Hohokam petroglyph designs are reused on freeways and neighborhoods in Arizona to this day, a style of decor which also serves as a reminder that even in a simpler time, this harsh environment could still be cultivated. Having left the Superstition Wilderness area by around 1000 CE, it would be the Pima, Yavapai, and Tonto Apache tribes who inhabited the Superstition Mountains by the time European settlers arrived. Throughout this time, the mountains had been known and feared for differing yet similar reasons. The intense summer storms have led some contemporary writers to spin the narrative that the Apache once believed the thunder god dwelled deep in the heart of the mountain, and it was the curse of the thunder god that caused people to disappear or die in such horrendous ways upon the mountain's side. Some have even said that the very hole in the earth which descends into hell is the cause of the rapid winds and violent storms, as it lies within the heart of the Superstition Mountains. It is hard to give credit to these stories, as they're likely just stories. Judging by the rather neutral naming of these places, like Mountains of Foam, Rocks Standing Up, these names don't assign to these places a sense of dread or fear like the Superstitions does. So mayhaps the native tribes of the areas did not fear this place at all, and it is merely the legends we know of the Lost Dutchman and the Peralta mines that makes us expect the story to lean this way. However, it is no surprise the superstitions and their history are the subject of both great exaggeration and sore underestimation. Folklore and fables are woven into the fabric of everyday life regardless of where you come from. There's always a monster, a mystery, a treasure, and a tale. One of the most famous mysteries in American culture is that of the Lost Dutchman mine. In fact, it may be the most famous tale of a lost mine these days.
Good luck finding the Lost Dutchman's gold mine, Janice. You make more money working a real job.
The story upon which many unfruitful expeditions have been led is really something of a bad game of telephone at this point. Most people of an older audience might remember this documentary.
In 1860, a miner called the Dutchman staggered out of the mountains more dead than alive. Something had kept him going when others would have given up. He had been tortured by Indians and seen his partner murdered. For days, he had traveled alone under the blazing sun. What was the secret that gave him the strength to survive? It was treasure. Great nuggets of gold. The Dutchman said he'd found a mine full of it.
What you just heard is, I'm fairly certain, completely made up. There are multiple versions of this story. In fact, there's even a version of the story that goes, a man was found dead in the desert beside multiple sacks full of gold, and not in Apache Junction, but instead in Wickenburg, which is 100 miles northwest of the Superstition Range. There's another story some have heard about the infamous Peralta family mine and the Peralta massacre in 1848. However, Robert Blair, the only historian to cover this topic in great detail in the 1960s and 70s, implied the massacre never happened, and that the story had simply been assimilated into one of the many ingredients that make up most distortions of the Lost Dutchman tale. But just to cover all grounds here, this story goes that a prominent Mexican family developed rich gold mines in the Superstition Mountains, and upon attempting to carry the gold back to Mexico, the caravan was attacked by Apaches, and the surviving family members barely escaped with their lives. The Apaches then either buried the gold or returned it to the mine, and subsequently covered the entrance to the mine itself. There's actually no evidence to support this story, and the Peralta family history is likely more fictitious than truthful when it comes to the Phoenix area. However, this did not stop people from spreading the rumor and believing it even to this day. As one version of the story goes, the Dutchman was tipped off in exchange for some kind of favor to a Peralta family member as to the location of the mine. Once again, there really isn't anything to go off of here. I genuinely find it more likely that if the Dutchman struck gold in the Superstition Range, it was by prospect and due process. So we've got so many stories, so many different ways. This beckons the question, was there an actual Dutchman? Well, yes, there was. Here is a picture of the gravestone of the actual man after whom the legend was spawned. He is buried in the Pioneer Military and Memorial Park, just west of Phoenix. For years, many have believed, written about, and speculated on the fantastical exaggerations of one potentially lucky prospector. Whether or not he obtained the gold all in one place or over years of multiple successful operations is something lost to the fog of time. There is very little we can actually know about this man and his life. Supposedly, he was German and had emigrated to the U.S. at some point between his alleged birth in 1808 and his first appearance in U.S. documentation in 1848, which said he would have been about 38 years old. So that would make him to be around his early 50s when he moved to Arizona in the 1860s, after which he pursued mining and prospecting. He owned a homestead and farm in the Phoenix area in 1870, and supposedly he became wealthy throughout the 1880s due to either periodic or sudden success in his endeavors, making him a very rich 70-year-old man. But not for very long. In the early spring of 1891, a massive flood surged through the Salt River, and therefore the young cities of Phoenix, Tempe, and Mesa that were based along its bank in the nearby areas were heavily flooded. The river was raised by 18 feet due to consistent rainfall and melting snow on the mountains. In one case, a man's house was swept away with him inside. The house collided with a tree and he climbed out onto the branches, after which he had to wait hours above the rushing water to be rescued. Many farms were damaged or destroyed by the catastrophic flood, including that of Jacob Waltz. Jacob fell ill in the coming spring and summer months, likely due to pneumonia. However, Jacob was at this point in his 70s and did not have the medical advancements of the 2020s, so he unfortunately perished come the fall of 1891. After his death and burial, acquaintances and friends spread stories. Some claimed he revealed to them landmarks to find such a mine, and over the next 40 years it grew and spun into urban legend until in 1931 it would be sparked and set ablaze. These days you have a much better chance at survival in the event of being lost or stranded in the Superstition Wilderness, or any wilderness area for that matter. There are park rangers, rescue helicopters, and half the people on the trail have 4G, a Bluetooth speaker, extra water bottle, and a drone. To top it all off, the range is surrounded today by roads and freeways, meaning if you have the stamina, going directly east or west, or even north or south, will land you near civilization, gas stations, roads, pretty fast. However, when Adolph Ruth, whom we will soon further discuss, set out on an expedition to find the fabled mine in 1931 and did not return, it was not as simple as jumping in a helicopter and searching the area. It would require people on the ground, hiking and searching in deadly world-class rugged terrain. In the late 1920s, there were few who were brave enough to fly anything less than 7,000 feet near the Superstition Range. Because of the massive rock formations and extreme temperatures, there are violent updrafts all across the range, making flying anywhere near the canyons and valleys incredibly dangerous. This did not stop the dreams and ambitions of one man in the Valley of the Sun by the name of Paul Rubel, who in 1928 designed, built, and test flew a plane for which he envisioned low-altitude flight. While it was somewhat underpowered, it proved to be surprisingly good at tight maneuvers. Paul Rubel was not only willing but preferred to fly close to the ground, so with his own plane that he built, he flew all over the mountains of central Arizona, traversing canyons and flying close to peaks in ways that may have sunk the stomach of your average aviator at the time. He dreamed that one day, planes similar to his creation would be used to spot and save people who had become lost deep in the Arizona mountains. After only a few years, Paul Rubel's dream of a future with search and rescue would begin to come true in 1931, when a treasure hunter by the name of Adolph Ruth went missing in the wilderness in an attempt to locate the rumored Peralta family mine. In another version of this story, his son, Erwin Ruth, gave legal aid to a Gonzalez family member in 1912. Gonzalez claimed that he was descended from the Peralta family, and that he was grateful for the legal aid that would have surely otherwise resulted in his imprisonment, and for doing so, he gave antique maps that detailed how to find his family's abandoned mine to Erwin personally. Erwin then showed these maps to his father, setting him on a fateful trek. Adolph Ruth arrived in the area in the summer month of June. He gathered and prepared his expedition at a farmstead, of which the owner urged Mr. Ruth to abandon the search. Between the difficulty of the terrain ahead and the summer heat and the wildlife that just wants to kill you, well, albeit due to stupidity, reckless abandon, or gold lust, Ruth completely ignored his warnings and set out into 100-degree temperature weather in the Superstitions in his 60s, and even still with 2 stints in his leg, requiring a cane to walk. After the 2 weeks had passed and Ruth did not return, he was declared missing, and thus the search efforts began. Erwin Ruth made his way to Phoenix personally and went through a series of pilots who were not willing to fly as low as Erwin was asking to find his father. Eventually, Erwin would find and hire Charles Goldtrap to do a couple searches over the mountains in the even more dangerous summer month of July. Mr. Goldtrap, accompanied by Edward D. Newcomer, made the first ever aerial search of the Superstition Mountains with an airplane. Newcomer was a photographer for the Phoenix Gazette, and together on that hot July day in 1931, Goldtrap and Newcomer changed aviation history in Arizona and fulfilled Paul Rubel's vision that someday airplanes would be used for searches over the rugged mountain terrain for missing people. This story, I feel, is important for many historical reasons, as search and rescues would become a major beneficial use of the airplane in the future, and the world potentially saw it first here in Arizona in one of the harshest mountain ranges during its hottest and most dangerous season. While the effort alone is truly amazing, unfortunately the search would prove fruitless, and it would not be until December of 1931 that a human skull with 2 bullet holes was discovered in the Superstition Mountains. To determine if the skull was Ruth's, it was examined by a well-respected anthropologist who was given photos and dental records to identify the skull as that of Ruth. He further stated after examining the 2 bullet holes that a shotgun or high-powered rifle had been fired through the head at almost point-blank range. Later, in January 1932, human remains were discovered about 3/4 of a mile or 1.21 kilometers from where the skull had been found. Though the remains had been scattered by scavengers, they were undoubtedly Ruth's. Many of Ruth's personal effects were found at the scene, including a pistol, the now exposed stints left over from his leg injury, and his checkbook in which he had written some kind of confirmation that he did find something. The map said to reveal the location of the mine, however, was nowhere to be found. Adolph Ruth was not the first person to go into the Superstitions in search of riches, nor the last. Over the last 90 years, many have gone out in an attempt to locate one of these fabled mines, and among them, more than a few have perished. Another story comes to us a decade later in the 1940s when another man in his 60s, unfit for the journey, trekked carelessly off into the wilderness in the summer months. At this point, helicopters could be used to drop and pick him up from designated camp and landing spots, but what's curious about this case is a trail of his belongings led to his corpse. This is strange because it suggests that rather than having been spread about at random by scavengers, he was discarding things crucial to his survival and comfort as he went along. First, he dropped his sleeping bag, then various other supplies, which could have obviously just been him unburdening himself. However, his canteen, which was still full of water, was also discarded. This is very strange, and I cannot understand why anyone would discard their water in the summer in the Superstitions. There are a couple theories I could postulate here. One is that someone, at gunpoint or otherwise, death-marched James through the desert, albeit because he got too close or just because it's Arizona. Another theory is that the Superstitions are indeed a place of great spiritual value. and that perhaps some tribe of people or even some force still know the secrets and treasures of the wilderness, and still they keep it. Eventually, hikers stumbled upon the headless skeleton of James A. Cravey, and it would take some time, but eventually his skull would be found in a long-running washout east of Weaver's Needle, with no indication being found that he had discovered a gold mine. So, what is going on here? Who could potentially have shot and killed Adolph Ruth? Who could have potentially death-marched and beheaded James A. Cravey? Is there evidence to even suggest that that's what happened, or was his head carried off by an animal and he was discarding his belongings because the sun had made him exhausted and insane? Could supposed Native American folklore be true? And do the superstitions have some mystical properties that affect people in unexplainable ways? Also, why do so many people go out there, almost it would seem intentionally, in the summer months? While it might just seem plain stupid, and don't get me wrong, I agree that it is, but doesn't it make some level of sense that you would want to find this mine with as few other people around as possible? This could be a factor in the competitive mind of a treasure hunter or prospector. There are ways to find cover and stay cool, even in the hottest summer days. In the Superstition Range, there are countless canyons, caves, and boulder caves in which you can find not only shade, but precipitation, a breeze, and perhaps even salt. Which beckons the question, is the heat survivable in the first place? In the Superstition Mountains, there is a large cave that most people know today as the Wave Cave. It has become a popular hiking trek in recent years and is a truly amazing natural feature in the area. However, you may be shocked to know most people do not realize the history of the cave in which they stand. The cave was originally known as the Apache Kid Cave, and just to give you a loose run through this story, the Apache Kid was believed to have been born in a New Mexico Indian Territory reservation in the 1860s. That would today be somewhere in southeastern Arizona. He served in the U.S. Army from 1881 until May in 1887, when he was involved in a situation where, well, the U.S. Army basically said, hey, you scouts hang out here with our guns and stuff and behave. And then the moment that they left, the scouts got drunk, rode horses, shot guns, and eventually they started fighting and killing each other. A true Western comedy.
I'm glad those fingers ain't loaded. Whew. Just like old times.
No, not really. Unfortunately, amidst the chaos, family members were killed and revenge was taken, which is what really resulted in such an escalation of violence. The Apache Kid was charged and imprisoned. However, he managed to escape when he was outside before a crowd in which a shot was fired. While the town was rather involved with this panic, the Apache Kid slipped away and then did something that I could only describe as incredible intuition, if not genius. Rather than flee south into Mexico, he actually stayed at the heavily U.S. Army-occupied territory and deathly hot region. He managed to elude recapture by hiding out in what is today known as the Wave Cave. Apache in the area who were sympathetic to the Apache Kid knew of a cave which can barely be seen, if at all, from the hills beneath. It appears as only a shadow among thousands cast by the many tumbled and eroded boulders of the hillside. Yet in the daylight, when you are standing inside of this cave, you can clearly see out of it. The sun reflecting off of the rocks and cliffs above act as almost a one-sided mirror. You can see out the cave, down the canyon, and if your eyes are sharp enough, you could even see through to one of the nearest camps and commonly used roads down on the valley floor at the time. To top it all off, there is consistent precipitation at the back of the cave, meaning that there's a small, but perhaps at times in the right seasons, significant amount of water. There's also salt which comes through the rock as well, resulting in a large portion of the wildlife relying on this cave at various times to lick up the water and salt and perhaps take a breather in the shade and lie down on the cool sand in the breezy cave. This cave is a commonly known hike today, but it at one point served as the only refuge for a renegade Apache who evaded not only capture but death altogether in the summer month of June in the Superstition Mountains. So, yes, the summer heat is survivable even with minimal supplies. It would seem a consistent factor in the Dutchman-involved deaths of the Superstitions is the sore underestimation of the terrain in which they had set foot. If you would dare to even hike in these mountains, which many do, respect them. The silence of this place seeps into you regardless of mindset or choice. Many who set foot in the Superstitions claim they absolutely live up to the name. Fables and folklore aside, it's just a breathtaking, life-threatening beauty that will put those who underestimate it through immensely difficult trials which all too often claim their lives. There is an ever-present consistency in the spooky stories and folklore behind the Superstitions, and it's this: devils roam the hills. It is a sacred place which stands the test of time, beckoning those to it with great entice, only to be lured deeper still into the heart of peaks and valleys that will not remember you after they outlast you. But there's gold, right? I came here for gold. When asking around locally or reading online, you'll get deliberately mixed answers to this question, and I'm going to save you some time here by showing you this map and saying probably definitely. But if you've watched this far, I'm guessing that you want more of the story. So let's go ahead and let's get into the final part of this video in which we will aim to answer this question with grounded geological evidence and historical mining claims in the area. Prospectors are like magicians, and they are incredibly secretive about their methods and search areas because at the end of the day they want to both be safe and discreet when it comes to potentially finding gold for obvious reasons. They don't want to bring unwanted competition or the attention of those who may be willing to rob or even kill you for it. It doesn't help that there are also some very strict rules in regards to prospecting and mining in the Superstition Wilderness today. However, there's plenty of sources and stories of people panning and prospecting, not just in the Superstitions, but all across Arizona, and finding significant amounts of placer gold, oftentimes really not that far away from the trail systems. As we covered earlier, the Superstition Mountains are the remnants of volcanic activity approximately 18 to 20 million years ago, which pushed until it created a collapsed caldera, which then domed back out of the earth over time, with the softer layers of sediment eroding away, leaving the hardened rock exposed as what we today recognize as mountains. This is why the terrain is so incredibly jumbled and dangerous to tread. But this also means that there are multiple soft and hard layers of sediment in which gold can most certainly be found. Not only that, gold is commonly found alongside these other types of rock. The question of whether or not gold can be found in the area is a clear, resounding yes. All across Arizona, gold can be found in abundance in numerous locations. People are still panning and prospecting in these wilderness areas to this day, even if they're not supposed to be. Fun fact, President Calvin Coolidge, whom played a role in my previous video about Johnston Atoll, at one point owned most of what is today South Mountain Park. He owned 13,000 acres of land, likely for potential prospecting, but wound up selling the land to the city of Phoenix for $17,000 in 1924, around $270,000 in today's money, which is kind of hilarious just given that the cheapest house in that area today is nearly double that value, with the more expensive houses being upwards of $2 million. I tried to find any reasoning on why Calvin Coolidge owned this land in the first place, and I can't find out when or why he obtained this land, or what his intended purpose was, or why he sold it back for so cheap. I don't know if he meant to own it for an investment, homestead, prospecting. I spent an hour trying to find any remote answer as to why in the hell he just kind of owned most of South Mountain Park and let it go for so cheap when gold had actually been discovered as early as 1895 at the northern base of South Mountain itself, and a mine began producing by 1913. With no readily accessible answer at hand, I'll just give you my speculation, which is that he could have obtained the land and then perhaps after a brief survey decided it wasn't worth the investment and the competition of the nearby mine already operating. It's also important to note that his 16-year-old son had died that year, so maybe in the midst of the grief and being the president, he just simply let it go for the sake of mind and schedule. From my Johnson et al. Video, we know that he was willing to sign executive orders in regards to wildlife preservation. He was also very dedicated to public relations when it came to Native Americans. So on top of everything, maybe the city of Phoenix explained their plans for South Mountain Park, and it seemed a valiant effort in his eyes. Again, I really wish I could have a clear reason as to why he had purchased or obtained the land there to begin with, so maybe you could leave a comment if you know something that I don't. But I couldn't find anything about it, so let's just move on. So the mine that struck gold was actually called the Max Delta Mine, which is today a stone throw away from people's backyards, so obviously there are hiking trails to it if you're ever in the area. During the Great Depression, the mining and production of gold increased, which actually made this mine the second largest producer of gold in Maricopa County at the time. Then, in 1942, there was an order from the U.S. War Production Board saying that gold mining was unnecessary to the military effort during World War II, and so the mine was permanently shut down, but not due to depletion. Today, many have been daring enough to wander into the mine, and it would seem it's been stripped clean of any remaining visible ore. So don't get the idea from this video to wander in there, and if that didn't occur to you, just know that I gotta say that in this video regardless. There's centipedes, scorpions, bats, and faulty near 100-year-old bones holding the very cave up above you. It's stupid, don't go in. Today, most people accept the idea that there's no knowing the truth of the matter when it comes to Jacob Waltz. However, based on the geology, the mining claims all across the state, and the continued strange circumstances surrounding the deaths of those in pursuit of the Lost Dutchman mine, I believe it is safe to say that there was truth to these stories. That to some degree, science and folklore support each other's case, but not in any one direct narrative. With the Superstition Range now being heavily trafficked and protected as a national park, there are major restrictions on prospecting in the area. People still do it, and you can find online forums where they're sort of using lingo and code to each other to reference the general areas in which it's found. But more than anything, most missing persons cases in the wilderness today are not entirely related to the mine. It's become a very famous hiking hub for tourists and locals alike. So more often than not, it's simply the lack of preparation and judgment that leads people to their fate. The superstitions are widely renowned for the lost gold mines, the missing persons, and strange happenings, yet still, people continue to this day to underestimate the grounds upon which they tread. It's a beautiful place. Magnificent stone canyon walls and massive jutting peaks. When setting foot in the superstitions, it's important to remember that they've earned the name for both scientific and phenomenal reasons. No matter which lens you peer through, the skeptical and the logical, or the paranormal and the unexplainable, either way, it is a dangerous place. People have reacted intensely and instinctively to this region as long as they've been encountering it, and with enough exposure to the harsh climate and terrain, it's easy to become disoriented, confused, and lost. Hopefully, search efforts can prove useful, but if not, well, then you just might be able to see them before you go. The devils that roam the hills.
$200,000 acres. 200,000 acres. What'll it cost, man? What'll it cost?
Box of these.
Are you crazy? They'll never go for it. And then again, they might. Little red devil. They love toys. May I try one?
Please do, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. These things are defective.
Right as usual, sir.